Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is round 3 from the 2014 Sinquefield Cup between the world's number 1 Magnus Carlsen playing as white versus the world's number 2 Fabiano Caruana. Let's have a look. Carlsen opens with e4, Caruana replies e5, bishop c4, the bishop's opening, pointing at the weakest square in the black camp, knight f6, d3, and now c6, preparing to build an ideal pawn center d5, e5 structure. Knight f3, development not with tempo in this case. This pawn is not being threatened, since queen a5 would pick him up. So black's consistent, d5 it is. And now bishop b3. If as white you are at all wondering, should I capture first on d5 and only after the recapture do I back up? Notice that by doing just that, you will have helped black. The current pawn ratio in the center is 2-2. If you're to first capture and drop back, it's now converted into a 2-1 majority in favor of black. And you've vacated the c6 square, the ideal deployment for the queen knight. So in other words, after d5, it's best to immediately drop back, and do so knowing that there's not going to be any problem after d takes e4. If black is to follow up like that, there's now knight g5, and we are again focused on the weakest square, f7. What would maybe be best for black at this point is to block with the bishop, but after the smoke clears, what we have is a good ending for white. Perfect home on e2, better structure, better bishop, since this pawn is fixed on a dark square and probably an accessible point to either the white knight or bishop. Okay, we don't go down that road. My point here is to meet d5 with immediate backing up to b3. As a follow-up, we have bishop b4 check. This move will inconvenience white in some way, regardless of how white replies. In the game it was c3, and then the bishop drops back to defend e5. Now, how is white inconvenienced by playing c3? Well, you can be sure the knight now cannot make use of c3. And why would he want to play there? Well, white really wants to put pressure on this ideal black center. It's ideal, it's strong because it has options. It's there to sit, control a lot of squares. It could capture, it could push. White wants some clarification. White wants black to commit. If the bishop initially plays here, there could be knight c3. There's pressure on d5. That's uncomfortable to defend. Black may very well need to push. We now have a closed center, and play will ensue on the wings. The white pieces are quick to spring to life. The f-file opens up. You could see the the white rook and the bishop converging on f7 soon. The knight even jumping into f5. Okay, but by inserting this check, c3, and only then dropping back, it will not be the knight who influences the black center. What about another option? Knight here, you don't want to block the bishop. What about bishop d2? That seems perfectly reasonable. I believe there is maybe some downside with that as well. Notice after bishop takes bishop, queen takes bishop, this knight may very well increase. His potential may increase. If he somehow gets to f4, he's going to be a giant pest. He's not so easily kicked. There's now not a dark square bishop that can remove him. Can a pawn guard f4? You bet, with g3, but at the same time, you'd weaken your light squares f3 and h3. And do you have a light square bishop around that is likely to be guarding those squares? No. This is a queenside specific bishop. Okay, my main point here is that I believe however you slice it, white will be inconvenienced in one way or another by this bishop check. Okay, the move chosen was c3, the bishop drops back. This knight will not be able to influence this center, but the dark square bishop will, bishop g5. By applying pressure to the knight, he's now not there to defend d5. it's at this point that black commits. D takes E, D takes E, and now H6. Okay, white wants to keep the pin, bishop H4, and now queen to E7, reinforcing the E5 point. The knight wants to play here, but that would be dropping the bishop. So it's first queen E7, knight B to D2, knight B to D7, and now bishop G3. This move initially struck me as a bit odd, to pull the bishop off of this diagonal, to remove the pin, in other words. But it's there to put direct pressure on E5, and by doing so, maybe deterring black from trying some knight transfer to G6. That might be some idea that black has, but by keeping pressure on E5, this is probably not a good choice. As an example, let's say in this position the bishop first backs up to C7, getting out of potential threats on the D file by the queen or even the knight. Suppose after this bishop C7 move white castles, and now black tries to go for something like knight F8 to G6, or something like knight F8, G5, and only then knight to G6, looking to sink into the F4 square. Notice how as soon as a move like this is played, due to the pressure on E5, there is this tactic. Bishop takes E5, bishop takes, knight takes. Black is there, winning a piece, but only temporarily, because now what follows is knight C4, hitting the queen, and that knight will be hopping into D6 with great effect soon thereafter. Queen H5, knight D6, in fact, immediately. King E7, you get the idea. Black is running for his life. If queen takes queen, there's pawn takes knight. King takes, rook takes with check, and at the end of it, what do we have? White in the driver's seat. White is winning, getting the piece back. Material plus as well. Okay, we don't go down that road. My main point here is that there is a reason that white has to unpin the F6 knight. Okay, bishop G3 it is. Bishop C7, again, getting out of the line of fire, getting off of the only open file. White castles, knight H5. So with this, we're now going to have an imbalance. We're going to have a knight for bishop exchange. The move played here was H3. Notice what just happened here. This bishop was the one, this dark square bishop was the one that eventually made that ideal center flinch. That's what made black commit, having pressure on D5. But notice now that that bishop is being targeted. He's now accessible. If we compare the bishops, the black bishops are tucked away. There's not going to be a white knight attacking any of these two bishops, but clearly we have a black knight that's able to take out one of the white bishops, the dark square bishop in this case, and create an imbalance as a result. So while white was able to make the black pawn center flinch, well, now black is also able to pick up the bishop pair. And that's what we see. The move played here, H3, is one that I really have a difficult time understanding. I'm not quite sure why that move was played. I could see ideas of maybe wanting to stop a bishop or a knight from making use of this square, but to be perfectly honest, I just don't know why H3 was played here. Okay. The follow-up was knight takes bishop, pawn takes knight, and now knight to C5. Let me point out that these last couple moves by white, by playing H3, that weakens G3, and after pawn takes G3, that also weakens G3. This pawn occupies G3, but it does not control G3, and without the pawn on F2, you're no longer controlling E3. So it's these two key squares, these two dark squares, that are now weakened on the white king side, and it is white that does not have a dark square bishop around. So immediately what comes to mind is this dark square bishop. Is there a way to exploit the white kingside position. Okay, so as a follow-up, what do we have? It is knight c5, attacking the bishop, and the big shock of this game was move 15, without a doubt. Bishop takes f7. Wow. It's just out of nowhere. It was just quiet for a little while here, a lot of maneuvering, a lot of minor pieces getting involved, and black is not castled. All of a sudden, in comes this bishop takes f7 check. Well, there's only a couple options. Let's rule out one of them immediately. Queen takes f7 will not end well due to knight takes e5. Best is probably to take the rook. If you're doing something else, you are inviting the queen into the black position with check, and you're going to get killed very soon. Okay, let's not even go any further there. The alternative, to give up the queen, well, that's not going to turn out well. Seems like black has a lot of material for giving up the queen, but this queen's going to be getting the bishop back. White is winning. So my main point here is that after this shocking move, bishop takes f7, you can't take with the queen. It's not good. So you have to run right into a discovered check, or in this case, a double check. The follow-up here was knight takes e5, and then the king has to run to g8. This was not the only option. Another one was to play knight h4, and after king g8, get to g6. This knight eventually arrives on g6. The move played in the game was knight takes pawn, king g8, knight g6. What are the differences between this route and this one here? Well, for one, the e5 pawn is not around in this variation, the one chosen in the game. There is no e5 pawn around, and what this means is that the bishop will have something a bit more to say about the white kingside position, clearly. Hitting at g3, indirectly hitting at h2. Okay, this is the path that white chose, but maybe this was another one to consider. Sure, you don't win material, but you're at least not having to worry as much about dark square pressure, the g3 and h2 squares. Okay, well, in the game it was knight takes e5, double check, king g8, knight g6 with the fork, queen g5, staying very active, putting pressure on the dark squares. There's a checking square on e3, g3. Rook f8, king h7, an only move. And now there's a couple options here. Rook takes rook, knight takes rook. In the game it was knight takes rook. If rook takes rook, the king has to come out, of course. It's an only move. He's coming towards the center, but there's still a lot of tricks in the position. As an example, well, there's pressure on g3. If, let's say, white is trying to defend this point here, notice how this rook in the corner is unprotected, allowing for bishop to g4, attacking the queen. Black's going to be getting the rook. Okay, we don't go in that direction. I'm not saying that this is anywhere near being a best move at this point, but I just wanted to highlight a particular tactic in the position, this bishop g4 idea, which still shows up in the game after the move played knight takes rook in the corner. Eventually we do see this bishop moving with tempo on the queen. Immediately, in fact, move 19, bishop g4 is still played, hitting the queen and this unprotected piece on f8. I should maybe point out that after this variation, if instead of queen f3, suppose queen c2, this is one idea to play queen to e3. I believe rook to b8 is another idea, simply defending, allowing the bishop to defend the rook so that this bishop is now able to move. And we're in a position here where it's the two minor pieces versus a rook. Okay, well, at the end of the day, we don't go down that road, do we? After rook check, king h7, it's knight takes rook, so this white knight is now in the corner. As the follow-up, it's bishop g4. Again, queen hit, rook hit. Queen f1 is there now to defend the rook. And now knight to d3, a move that Carlsen later described as amazing. What is it doing? Well, a lot. So looking at the f2 square, there's ideas of queen e3 with knight f2. There's also ideas of bishop b6 getting on this diagonal with check. Suppose after knight d3, white captures the rook. This is the main thing to consider. Can white simply not win the black rook? What's wrong with that? Well, what's wrong with it is queen e3. This is what black has up their sleeve. Queen e3 check. If king h2, this is running into a mate in 1, 2. So let's not go to h2 in other words. What about king h1? King h1 allows knight f2 check. And what's maybe best is to actually give up the queen. If you're doing something else, king here, this is running into a mate in 3 with check, check, and then checkmate. So that's not working out so well. And well, what other options are there? King g1 runs into knight takes e4, king h1, queen takes g3, and what are you going to do to defend? Queen here to defend h2, runs into knight f2, and then mate. So really, however you slice it, this queen and knight tandem and bishop being involved are just too much for the white king. And so, in other words, after knight d3, rook takes rook is not a good idea. The move played in the game was queen takes knight, and this now allows rook takes rook, pawn takes bishop, and current body count here, what do we have? Black is down a minor piece, needs to get that knight back, but really doesn't need to get that knight back, does he, right away? The move played in the game was queen takes g4. This knight is not going anywhere. There's no need to take him. He's not bothering black. It's very close to the king, but there's no coordination. It's just the knight alone. It's different if there's another piece involved, another white piece involved in an attack against the king. Not the case here. As a follow-up, we have knight f3, repositioning the knight, trying to defend the king side that has been wrecked here on the white side. After knight f3, queen takes g3 again. There's no need to take the knight. He's not bothering black. Still moving forward, removing g3 weakens these dark squares, and this king is all the more vulnerable. These moves bring to mind the bishop checks, ideas of maybe if you force the king to the h-file looking for mate, if the bishop can be controlling g1. So we're not still. The second move in a row. Caruana is not grabbing the knight, but grabbing another pawn. More vulnerable white king as a result. e5 with check, so okay, finally, king takes knight is played. e6, this pawn is looking to stir up some trouble, clearly. A couple steps away. e7 would come with tempo. As a follow-up, we have bishop check, king h1. This king is just barely hanging on. If this knight is not around to defend h4, queen h4 is going to be mate. With g1 being defended by the bishop now, we're very, very close to black having some mating net against the king. So after king h1, it's queen g4, which has the h5 square now available, which would force the knight into a defensive post, knight h2. Queen d6 throws a punch at the rook. Black fires back, counter punch, rook d8. Queen e5, rook d5. This rook is very active. I was just talking earlier about queen h5, but now comes to mind rook h5. Queen to b8. Need to be direct. Both players here, these last handful of moves have been punch, counter punch. King h7. e7. White's ready to promote. Queen h5 with check. Knight h2. This was a big slip by white. There was a miscalculation better is to play queen h2, and what would follow is queen e8, which is a very sneaky move, of course, looking to track down this pawn, and paves the way for rook to h5, which is close to winning that queen. A best move, if this was the move played right here by white to block with the queen on h2, after queen e8, what's maybe best is g4 to defend the h5 square, but this is certainly weakening the white king. This diagonal, the knight is now without support. Black can grab that pawn, black is up a pawn, better king position, and this is going to be tough to defend. I don't believe that there is a defense if black plays accurately here. It's just too much. Heavy pieces on the board, bishop, too much going for black in this line. One other line might have included rook to e1, but that could be met with bishop f2, and if the rook leaves the back rank, like rook here, well, the rook is going to come down to d1. You have to block like this, and then white is winning material. And, well, where else are you going to go with the rook? Rook here allows for rook h5, and the best that white could do is give up the queen in the following way. And this here is a very interesting position. There may very well be some chances to organize a fortress, but keep in mind with this 2-to-1 majority, black is always able to create a pass pawn, maybe a g pawn or h pawn, and maybe one day the king could even sneak over in this direction to put pressure on the b pawn, and there could be a timely queen sacrifice of the b pawn, and then the king could grab the white pawns over on this side of the board, on the queen side. I'm just trying to give some idea of a direction you could go if this was the position and white is trying to hold or build some fortress. I played around with this for a little bit, and I had a difficult time seeing exactly what the correct method would be, but I believe that this is some idea to bring the pawn down to a4 to lock these pawns. The rook really doesn't want to leave the second rank. Maybe there's a way that this king could somehow cross over here and put pressure again on this b pawn, and there's a timely queen sacrifice on b2. The rook has to give itself up after black has already, let's say, created a passed pawn over here on either the g or h files. This isn't a direction we went in, but nevertheless, maybe a best case scenario for white, if he is, of course, playing a rook to e1 at this point. We never quite got to this position in the game because, again, after this queen check on h5, it was not queen h2, but rather knight h2, and what follows is simply rook d1, rook takes, queen takes, the knight has to block, queen takes knight, king h2, queen g1 check, and it's at this point that Carlsen resigns, because what are you going to do? g3, h3, those are your two options. Regardless of which one you choose, there's always queen e3, and queen takes pawn. Black is up a piece, a pawn, better king. Material is the biggest thing here. White is clearly lost in this position. So, I'm not sure what was missed here. After the game, Carlsen referenced something like he had seen this position a few moves further back. He said to himself he had to play this queen to h2 because of this rook idea, but once it got to this position right here, he ended up changing his mind and forgetting about this rook to d1 move. Instead, again, playing knight h2, and he allows this first rank check. The knight is again picked up, and after queen g1 again, it is at this point that Carlsen resigned. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it. Take care. Bye. Magnus replying e5. knight f3, knight c6, and d4 enters the Scotch opening. And now on move 4, black has a decision, opting for bishop c5.